Welcome to Christ Chapel College, the college outreach of Christ Chapel Bible Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We hope everyone experiences what Jesus calls abundant life. So we unapologetically point to Him as the source of life and joy. If you're a college student in the Fort Worth area, we'd be stoked to connect with you. Find out more at christchapelcollege.org and on Instagram at Christ Chapel College.
Amen. Hey, good morning, 9 a.m. How we doing? Okay, wow. That's a lot of energy for daylight savings. I love it. Hey, if I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, my name is Jake, and I'm just part of the team here, but I get the honor and the privilege of getting to bring you guys the word this morning. And it's been really cool to get to have been a part of this ministry and now get to be bringing the word to you guys this morning. So if you've been following along this semester, you know we've been in the book of Nehemiah. We've been in the Old Testament. And I know spring break's coming up. We're about halfway through. So let me give you a quick refresher of where we've been. So we picked up in chapter 1 with our boy Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is a cupbearer to the king. He's a high-ranking Jewish official. And one day he catches wind. He hears news about the state of the walls of Jerusalem. When he hears this, he's deeply moved and burdened by this. And he's so compelled, he then goes to the king, King Artaxerxes, the king of Persia, and he comes with this bold ask, this bold request. He says, I want to go to Jerusalem, 100 miles away, and restore the wall. Will you allow me? Not only will you allow me, but will you give everything I need? Will you give me the protection, the provisions, the resources, everything I need? And he gets crazy favor with the king, and the king gives him exactly what he wants. And then he comes up with the plan. He scouts out the state of the walls. And then in chapter 3, we see this plan take into action. And it's this beautiful picture of unity. We see everyone, all sorts of walks of life, all sorts of different occupations. We see goldsmiths and priests and Levites and fathers and daughters. They're all chipping in to build this wall. It's this beautiful picture of unity. And then if you remember last week, Justin talked to us about what does it mean to be a resilient people. We saw this guy, Sanballat, kind of the main antagonist in Nehemiah's story, who's coming, he's slandering Nehemiah, he's trying to distract them from what they're doing and to get them to stop doing the work on the wall, but they push through. They're building in the day, they're protecting themselves at night. Some are building with one hand, guarding, holding a spear in the other. It's this beautiful picture of resilience. And so that's where we left off last week. There's this external event going on outside of the walls, this external opposition. And now chapter 5, we're going to shift gears. We're not looking at an external threat. We're looking at an internal crisis that's going on within the walls of Jerusalem. And so that's where we're going today in chapter 5. We're going to be looking at two different types of leadership. We're going to first see when this famine arises, there's these leaders, these nobles, who step in and they start laying heavy burdens on their people. So we're going to look at selfish leadership that lays heavy burdens, and then we're going to see Nehemiah step in, and he models servant leadership, a servant leadership that lifts heavy burdens off of people. Okay, we've got selfish and servant leadership. And before I hop in, I want to give two quick caveats, because I think when we hear leadership, one of two things will happen. One, you hear leadership and you think, okay, that's great, but that's not for me. I'm quiet, I'm introverted, I'm not the loudest person in the room, I'm not that old, I'm not that wise. But I want to encourage you with this. This is a quote by Andy Crouch. He says, leadership begins when we start caring more about the people we lead than the positions that we hold. And what that means is that leadership is influence, not position. So you don't need a title to be a leader. You aren't given influence. You earn it. You earn it by the way you show up for people, by the way you care for people, by the way you listen to people. And each and every one of you, I don't know who you are or what your life looks like, but you are all intentionally placed in different pockets of people, different friends, relationship, classes, careers, professions. And you have people around you that you care about. And that means you're a leader. Okay, everyone's a leader. Caveat 1. Caveat 2, I think on the other end of that, I think we can also tend to think, okay, I'm actually a pretty good leader. I know a thing or two. I've actually held a couple positions. Maybe I've had an internship. I'm actually really good at this whole leadership thing. I don't need to worry about what it means to be a bad leader. And I want to encourage you with this same quote by the same guy. It says, "Power reveals what's in the heart." Nobody ever intends to start off to be an evil and corrupt leader. That's not our intention. But what happens is once we rise to a position of power, once we taste status, success, wealth, it can corrupt our hearts. And slowly, we don't intend to be the leader that lays heavy burdens, but suddenly we do. Right? In second grade, nobody sets out and says, I want to be an oppressive, tyrannical leader. They say, I want to be a president or an astronaut. But somehow, and I think it's this sinful nature in our hearts, our own pride, our own desire for control, slowly creeps in. Our desire for our own comfort gets in the way of the compassion for others. And so I want to warn you with that when you hear about selfish leadership, don't think that just because you start off with good intentions doesn't mean that that can't be you one day. And I say that because I know that from personal experience. I think of a time when I was in college. One summer, I lived in Panama City Beach, Florida, and it was awesome. I was at this 8-week discipleship program called Kaleo, and what my weeks looked like is 4 days out of the week, I was flipping burgers at McDonald's, and then at night, I was learning about Jesus and learning how to share my faith. But then one day out of the week, in order to stay on track with Neely, I had to take applied calculus, which was not, needless to say, was my least favorite day out of the week. And so one day, I would hang back at the condo and just chill, do my homework. But this particular week, my leader, his name was Wayne, he was preaching his first sermon. And we were all pumped. All the guys were kind of rallying around him. We could tell he was nervous and he was excited. And before he left one morning, it was this morning I was doing my homework, I said, Wayne, is there anything I can do to lighten the load, to make something a little bit easier for you? I said, thanks, man. No, I'm all good. I think just need me a good night's sleep and some prayer, and I'll be just fine. Right? And Wayne's just a humble guy. He doesn't need anything. And so I'm like, okay. So he goes on his way. I'm doing my work, but I'm sitting there. I'm thinking, man, there's got to be something. There's got to be something I can do to lighten the load for him. And I'm kind of looking around, and it's 6 guys, 1 condo. It's just chaos. Sand's everywhere, clothes everywhere. The least I can do is just tidy up a bit. So I start cleaning up the condo. I'm sweeping up the sand. And as I'm sweeping up the sand, it hits me. I have this groundbreaking idea. I know exactly what Wayne needs. Some clean sheets. Right? There's no better feeling in the world. You know what I'm talking about? It is a religious experience. When you come home to some clean sheets, you go to a hotel or your home and they're just fresh, they're clean, they're crisp. Right? There is no better feeling. And so I take his sheets, I take mine, and I'm like, I might as well do everyone else's, right? I'm going to earn major brownie points. Everyone's going to love me. I'm going to be the best roommate in the world. Throw them in the washer, start a load, go back to my homework. But I come back about an hour later, and I realize that something has gone terribly wrong. The machine's blinking at me, and when I open it, it's just full of standing water. Sopping, wet, sandy water. And so I closed it, I try to restart it again, but only this time it kind of sounds like a car trying to start on a cold winter's day. And panic starts to set in, right? Because as you can imagine, right, if the most pleasant experience is to come home after a long, hard day to some clean, fresh sheets, the last thing Wayne and my roommates want to do is come home to the unpleasant surprise of a pile of sopping wet sheets on the floor. I'm panicked, I'm stressing, do I run to a laundromat? I don't know what to do, but here's the irony in all of this. Wayne didn't ask me to do any of that. See, the one thing he actually asked me to do was to pray for him, and to be honest, I don't even think I did that. But my own desire, my own selfishness, what I thought would be best, I took actions into my own hands. And even though I started off with good intentions, along the way, my own desire for control and selfishness got in the way. And I ended up laying a much heavier burden on Wayne and the rest of my roommates than I ever imagined. Right? And that is how this burden laying begins. Right now, I don't want you to be the type of leader leaving your people with wet sheets. You don't want that for you. I don't want that for you. God doesn't want that for you. You want to be a servant leader who lifts heavy burdens off of people. But as we're going to see in Nehemiah 5, our selfish tendencies seem to get in the way. And we tend to be selfish leaders who lay heavy burdens on other people. So let's pick up in verse 1. Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 1. It reads like this. It says, "Now there arose a great outcry of the people and their wives against their Jewish brothers. For there were those who said, 'With our sons and our daughters, we are many. So let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive.' There are also those who said, 'We are mortgaging our fields and our vineyards and our houses to get grain because of the famine.' And there were those who said, 'We have borrowed money for the king's tax on our fields and our vineyards. Now our flesh is as the flesh of our brothers, our children as their children, yet we are forcing our sons and our daughters to be slaves. And some of our daughters have already been enslaved, but it is not in our power to help it, for other men have our fields and our vineyards.'" So chapter 5 has laid the scene for what's going on inside of the walls. This is months after chapter 4. What's happened is a famine arose, and people are struggling just to make ends meet, to provide for their people. Right? You see all sorts of things going on. Because of this famine, people can barely put food on their table, and then on top of this, they're trying to pay off the debts and to get money, and then they're spiraling into more debt. They're taking on more debt, then they're leasing out their fields, which for many is their means of living, which is just continuing to spiral worse and worse, and it gets so bad. Some are even having to sell their own kids into this economic slavery, that the wage is so high, this burden is so heavy that they need to work the rest of their lives to pay this off. Right? It got out of hand quickly. But what's so heartbreaking about all of this is that the people that we see here, the ones that are being oppressed, right, were the same ones that were hand in hand in fellowship with the same people oppressing them just months before, just chapters before. Right? These same nobles, these same officials were the ones that were once unified on this vision of building and restoring the wall, but now they're exploiting their own people. And they show us that you can participate in God's work externally while still harming his people internally. And see, that is just how this sinful, selfish nature shows up in our own lives. It never shows up saying that we want to harm someone or that we want evil on someone, but it starts when our own comfort outweighs our compassion. See, it won't say, let's lay and oppress these people. What it will say is, it says, this will be good, this will be convenient. It'll tell you, if I don't do this, I'm going to fall behind, or I need to do this to get ahead. And we're so consumed with these thoughts that it slowly shapes us into someone we never intended to become, and slowly lays heavy burdens on other people. And as I thought about this topic, here are just a few things that came to mind, and I don't know if anyone can relate. How does this selfish burden laying show up in our own lives? Here's the first thing that came to mind: pornography. Part of my story and my testimony is my struggles with porn that God has redeemed. But here's how the nature of the porn industry works, if you're not aware. It is a hundreds of billions of dollar industry annually. It's one of the largest industries in the world. And what feels private and excluded is actually contributing to this billion-dollar industry. It doesn't matter the site or the video or how much or how little, but every time you do something like that, you're contributing to it. And this industry is the industry that fuels sex trafficking, abuse, sexual exploitation. And this is an example of where our own pleasure is at the expense of laying the heavy burden of exploiting vulnerable people. Or another idea that came to mind is and what I've seen is just status climbing. And this can show up in a couple different ways. I think academically, socially, professionally. But this is what status climbing looks like. It's when we're so concerned with climbing our way to the top that we're willing to do whatever it takes to get there. And anyone along the way just becomes our own stepping stone. When they're useful or helpful, yeah, they're our best friend. But as soon as we don't need them, we're never going to talk to them again. Right? Maybe it's you come to college and you have that one friend, but then as soon as you find that friend group, you don't need them anymore. Or this person's really valuable when they can help you get into this program or they can help you get into this job. But once they get you there, you don't need them anymore. Or maybe this friend is really great when he can help you study and help give you the answers. But as soon as you're done with that class, you don't need him anymore. Right? And our own desire for success lays the heavy burden on others of just feeling like a tool. And even in the church, it shows up as self-righteousness. I think this is part of my own story, is that I came to the church with the right intentions. I wanted to get plugged in. I wanted to grow in my faith. I wanted to find this community that everyone talked about, this inclusive community that was, and I went to some trips and I got plugged in and it was awesome. But then what happened is, as soon as I made all my friends, and I had some awesome friends, right, we close off the circle. Right? Once I have my friends and I'm content with who I have, I don't need to add anyone else, and I don't need to care about the person on the outside. Right? In this inclusive community that draws us in, you slowly shift into this exclusive clique because of your own desires. And you lay the heavy burden of exclusion on someone else. And again, that's never how we intend to start out, but that's how our sin and our selfishness slowly twist our leadership. Right? So if that's what selfish, burden-laying leadership looks like, that begs the question, how do we lead in a way that lifts burdens instead of laying them? How do we lead in ways that lift burdens instead of laying them? So let's see how Nehemiah responds. Picking up in verse 6. It says, I was very angry when I heard their outcry in these words. I took counsel with myself, and I brought charges against the nobles and the officials. I said to them, you are exacting interest, each from his brother, and I held a great assembly against them, and said to them, we, as far as we are able, have brought back our Jewish brothers who have been sold to the nations, but you even sell your brothers that we may be sold to us. They were silent and could not find a word to say. So I said, the thing that you are doing is not good. Ought you not to walk in the fear of our God to prevent the taunts of the nations, our enemies? I love the details that Scripture gives us here. So Nehemiah has just taken the time to gather the testimonies of all of these people and understand the full picture of what's unfolded, the injustices that are being incurred upon them. And he's angry. Right? He's angry, but he also knows this. He responds with wisdom and patience. Right? It says he took a moment to consult himself. And what that means, I view that of like someone says something and you're really agitated. You kind of got to take a step back, take a deep breath, because you know you're just a few seconds away from a crash out. And so he collects himself. He gathers his thoughts. And then he delivers this very calculated response. And what we see here is this. Point number one is that Nehemiah shows us that servant leaders lift burdens by listening to the cry. He listens to the cry of the people. He understands their situation. He's moved with empathy and compassion. He understands exactly what they're doing. And because he understands and listens, he then himself can show compassion. And he gives them this very calculated response. First, he says brothers in his response. He says, do you know what you're doing to your brothers? And why he's saying this and why that's significant is because he's reminding them who they are. He's saying, these are your brothers and your sisters, your fellow Jews, children of God, and you're laying heavy burdens on them. And then he reminds them, he gracefully reminds them. He says, do you remember how we ended up here? Right? If you remember the timeline of Nehemiah, how they got into this whole situation, it started 500 years ago with the same exact problem. King Rehoboam laying heavy burdens that led to the split of the 12 tribes of Israel. And that led to Judah and Benjamin, who were then conquered by Assyria and Babylon plundered Jerusalem. They destroyed the city and destroyed the walls and enslaved the people. And Nehemiah's like, do you know where we're at? Do you know how we got here? But he listens with compassion. He hears the cry of the people, and he's deeply moved by it. So let me ask you this. Are you slow to speak and quick to listen? Are you slow to speak and quick to listen? Are you the type of leader that when you see something or when someone comes to you, do you just sit and listen to them? If they confide in you and bring you a burden, are you trying to listen and understand and paint the full picture? Because I think we can all think of someone, or maybe can relate to the fact of when someone, you're trying to confide in someone and you already know that they know what they're going to say. Like they kind of tune you out. They're so concerned with what they want to say, they could care less about what you have to say. Right? That's the worst feeling. That doesn't show compassion. That doesn't show that you actually want to care. Servant leaders lift burdens by listening to the cry. Are you quick to listen and slow to speak? Moving on, verse 10. It says, "Moreover, I and my brothers and my servants are lending them money and grain. Let us abandon this exacting of interest, return to them this very day their fields, their vineyards, their olive orchards, and their houses, and the percentage of money, grain, wine, oil that you have been exacting from them." When they said, "We will restore these and require nothing from them, we will do as you say," and I called the priests and made them swear to do as they had promised. I also shook out the fold of my garment and said, "So may God shake out every man from his house and from his labor who does not keep this promise. So may he be shaken out and emptied." And all the assembly said, "Amen," and praised the Lord, and the people did as they had promised. So what do we see? Nehemiah does not just stop at compassion. He hears the cry, but he lets that compassion move him to action. Point number 2 is servant leaders lift burdens by confronting injustice. And how do we see this in Nehemiah? Right, I love Nehemiah's response. Right, so he's kind of lovingly challenged them by just asking them these questions, but now we see him actually taking action against the injustice that has arose. And again, Nehemiah comes in and it's calculated. He doesn't come in and he doesn't slap them on the wrist and say, "Guys, stop doing that." No, he goes in as much as to say, "You are immediately to stop doing this right now. And not only are you to stop what you're doing, you're actually to reconcile and restore what you've done. You're going to give them back their land. You're going to pay back their money. You're going to restore this to be right." And then he doesn't even stop there. He goes on as far as to say, "I'm also going to hold you accountable." He makes them go before a bunch of priests and swear that they're going to do this. He gets their word, and then he praises over them that if they break this promise, would the wrath of God fall upon them? Would they be shaken out? Right? Nobody wants to be shaken out. That is not a good thing. So let me ask you this. Does your compassion lead you to action? Are you the type of leader that lets your compassion for others actually move you to action? When someone confides in you and shares something, or you observe something, or you hear something, does it move you in your heart? But then do you actually step in and do something about it? Or you just helplessly watch? You say, "Man, that sucks." Or do you step in to confront it? Do you step in head on? Right? Because that's also the worst thing. If you tell someone something, right, and you say, "Man, this is happening, this isn't right." And they say, "Yeah, you're right." And then nothing happens. Right? Confront the injustice. Be precise about it. Have a plan. Step into it. Servant leaders lift burdens by confronting injustice. Does your compassion lead you to action? Moving on to verse 14. Then says, "Moreover, from this time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year to the 32nd year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, neither I nor my brothers ate the food allowance of the governor. The former governors who were before me laid heavy burdens on the people, and took from them their daily ration of 40 shekels of silver. Even their servants lorded it over the people, but I did not do so because of the fear of God. I also preserved in the work on this wall, and we acquired no land, and all my servants were gathered there for the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 men, Jews and officials, besides those who came to us from the nations that were around us. Now what was prepared at my expense each day was 1 ox, 6 choice sheep and birds, and 10 kinds of all kinds of wine in abundance. Yet for all this I did not demand the food allowance of the governor, because the service was too heavy on this people. Remember for my good, O my God, all that I have done for this people." So what have we seen? Nehemiah listens with compassion. He hears the cry. This compassion, it moves him to action. He confronts the injustice. And now what do we see? Nehemiah puts his money where his mouth is, and he actually models this. He steps out with bold integrity. Point number 3 is this: servant leaders lift burdens by absorbing the cost. See, Nehemiah was the governor of Jerusalem, and what that meant is he was legally entitled to the governor's tax, just like our local governing authorities can tax us. But what Nehemiah saw is he saw the burden that was being laid on the people. He saw what this famine had done, and he saw the price was too great. And he says, I'm not going to do that. I know I'm going to forego that. And not only to say I'm going to forego the tax, he then goes as far as to say, I'm going to go one step beyond that, and I'm actually going to host 150 different Jews and officials and all sorts of different people with all sorts of different food. And he says there's an abundance of wine. That's his response to this. Right? And I love that. Because he models integrity. He's just rebuked and corrected these priests, or these leaders and these nobles. But now he's saying, you need to walk in this way, and I'm going to do the same. I'm not above the law. I'm going to hold myself to the same exact standard. Puts his money where his mouth is. He's practicing exactly what he's preaching. Right, and so what does it mean to absorb the cost? I think that maybe you hear that and you're like, does that just mean I need to go, bail my boy out next time he's down a couple bucks? No. Maybe it is. It could be related economically, but I think absorbing the cost can look in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes it's just listening and providing encouragement, and sometimes it's just walking through and following up with someone as they go through a hard season of life. Step into what they are going through. Be in it with them. Don't just be telling them stuff and preaching them stuff from the outside, but actually be near, be close to them. Walk through that with them. Maybe it's connecting them to some real help. And whatever that may look like, absorb the cost. But at the bare minimum, I think absorbing the cost is this. It's just integrity. It's having the integrity to actually do what you're expecting other people to do. The advice you're telling someone else, do you actually believe that in your own life? Have you seen that in your own life? Right? Be the kind of leader that actually models integrity. Right? Because we can all probably think of a leader that doesn't. Right? And we call those kinds of people hypocrites. Right? And when you're a hypocrite, you lose respect, you lose credibility, you lose authority. Nobody wants to follow a hypocrite. So let me ask you this. Do you ever expect others to do things that you wouldn't do yourself? As a leader, do you ever ask people to do things? Would you just say, would you sacrifice this, or would you give up that? Would you do this? But yet you know that if they asked you the same, you wouldn't do that. No way. Or do you set expectations of people? You expect them to do this or to be up here, but you know that you couldn't even reach that yourself. Be a kind of leader that models integrity, because no one wants to be a hypocrite. And honestly, this idea of hypocrisy, man, when I think of this, when I think of what it means to model integrity and lead with the life that we're preaching to others, man, I think of the church. I think of the body of believers. Because, man, I think, myself included, we can all be guilty of this. Right? We have strong public convictions, but they may not match our own personal conduct. Our public convictions are big, and we expect everyone else to live a life this certain way, but then we actually don't match that in our own private life. Right? Do you preach about the freedom of the gospel and of what Jesus has offered you, but still live as a slave to sin on the weekends? Right, man, hypocrites are all throughout the church. Or I think of sexuality. As Christians, we should have strong sexual ethics. And when it comes to sexuality or gender, but then at times when it comes to our own struggles of lust or porn or just sleeping around outside of marriage, we seem to think that's fine. Right? We're just a bunch of hypocrites. And man, hypocrites are the worst, especially in the church, because man, many people are walking away from Jesus, not because Jesus hurt them, but because people who say they follow Jesus do. Right? That's what hypocrisy does. So model integrity. Do you ever expect other people to do things you wouldn't do for yourself? Do you absorb the cost? All right, so that's this blueprint that Nehemiah has gave us for servant leadership. How do we lift burdens? We listen to the cry with compassion. We're moved to action. We confront the injustice. We absorb the cost. We put our money where our mouth is. And you hear all that, and maybe you're thinking this. You're like, all right, I get it. 1, 2, 3, boom, 3 points. Nice. But you're still wondering, why? Why do I need to be a servant leader? Like, what's in it for me? Why do I need to be the person that slows down and gives someone the time of day? Why do I need to be the person that's standing up for someone that can't fight for themselves? Why do I need to be the person that's giving up my time, my energy, my money for someone else? Why? And to that, I would say this. It has nothing to do with what being a servant leader will get you. But I'm also sure it will make you a successful leader. But it has nothing to do with what it can get you. And the reason why is it has everything to do with what the greatest servant leader of all time has already gave you. See, maybe you've seen this as we read through Nehemiah in the Old Testament. Right? But Nehemiah is just a shadow of what's to come. See, Nehemiah comes and he absorbs his cost by giving up his allowance. But let me tell you, there was a guy named Jesus. And Jesus absorbed the ultimate cost by giving up his life. Right? And we don't have a God that can't empathize. He's not asking us something that he didn't already do himself. Right? From the beginning of time, God created us, and he saw that we would choose our sin. We chose rebellion from God. We would stiff-arm God and choose our own way. And as a result, sin plagues the world. There's this inherent feeling of brokenness, that things aren't the way that they're supposed to be. There's evil, there's corruption, there's awful things. But God heard our cry. And throughout history, he appoints all sorts of different leaders and shepherds and Abraham and Moses and all of these people. And they come in and they do a good job. But there's a problem. The power of sin is too strong. All of them fall to sin in some way, shape, or form. But he still hears the cry. He hears the groan of humanity and the result of sin in our world. And so what does he do? And he hears our cry, and he says, I'm going to step in. And so he sends his son. He sends his son, Jesus, the God of the universe, humbles himself in the form of a man. He steps in his creation, and he models this sinless, perfect life. Right? And he confronts injustice. He steps in, and he's calling people to repentance. He's calling out all these religious hypocrites. He's exposing the systems that are leaving everyone oppressed and with these heavy burdens. But see, Jesus is also justice. And he knows that our sin has a cost. Right? Romans says, for the wages of sin is death. That's what we deserve. That's what our sin has earned us. Right? Injustice means you can't just let someone walk free. But see, Jesus, he saw us. He saw the burden that was laid on us, that it was something too heavy for us, that we could never carry it ourselves. He saw the crushing weight of sin. And he knew that he had the capacity to take that away. And so what he did is he went to a cross. He's beaten, he's whipped, he's flogged. He hangs on a cross, bleeding out, absorbing the cost of everyone's sin. because he knew that that burden was something too heavy that we could never overcome ourselves. He hangs there, he's put to rest in a tomb, and then 3 days later he rises because he is exactly who he said he was. He proves that he is Lord. And that's the good news. And that's why that's the kind of God that we have. And that if we put our hope and our faith and our trust in him, that's what he comes to bring us. Let me read you this. This is Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew 11, he says this. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." He says, bring me your sin, bring me your shame, bring me your anxiety, bring me the darkest parts of you that you don't want anyone to ever see, that are slowly crushing you, and I will give you rest. Right, that's the kind of God. That's the kind of God that we serve. And he's not asking us to do something that he didn't already do. Be the leader who lifts others' burdens because he already has. Let me pray. Father, God, I just thank you for your Son. God, I thank you that we have a God that can sympathize. A God who is near to us. A God who is not distant and removed, but who hears the cries of his people. And when he hears the cries, he steps in to confront the injustice, to bring restoration and reconciliation, God, even though that cost the precious blood of your Son, Jesus. God, I pray that that would be the fuel in us. God, would that be the wind in our sails that carries our lives into the rest of today, into the rest of this week, into wherever we're going on spring break. God, and would we desire to model that servant leadership, God, and lift the burdens off of other people. God, not because of what can get us, but because of what you've already done for us. In your Son's holy and precious name.